Hey everyone, I'm Danny. Got a question for you. Do you think it's possible that the Christian beliefs have been so deeply embedded in our minds that it's kind of like tunnel vision, that we can't see any other option for a story of Jesus, even though there's a different story right in the Bible itself? Well, since the 4th century, we have only been allowed to hear one story of Jesus. And this is the story that we were born so bad that Jesus had to come and die to save us. And we should feel guilty for what we did to Jesus. And don't question this, because it'll make God mad if we do. And anyone teaching anything different than this would have been tortured or burned at the stake even a few generations ago. And as proof, this man, Cayetano Ripoll, a Spanish school teacher, he became the final victim executed by the Church Inquisition for heresy only 197 years ago. But have you ever thought that maybe the 4th century church state authorities who gave us the story of Jesus and told us this is what you believe, and if we didn't, they eventually would burn us at the stake, were maybe the real heretics? Because I can't see Jesus or the gospel forcing anyone to believe and then torturing them if they don't believe. So let me share with you a different way of looking at Jesus from the gospel, and I bet you've never thought of it exactly like this before. Well, let's start by looking at the culture that Jesus was born into, because everyone in that culture had been indoctrinated into fearing God and following the law of Moses in early childhood. And don't choke on the word indoctrinate. To indoctrinate, it simply means to take doctrines, which are just beliefs about God. This is who God is. This is what God's like, and this is what God demands of you. And parents and religious authority figures place these doctrines, they plant them into our minds as children before we are able to reason it out for ourselves. And if we accept it because everybody else believes it, well, we have been indoctrinated. And that's okay. That's par for the course, because every religion tries to indoctrinate their children. And this is why, before modern transportation and communication, we were born into a nation, a culture, and a religion. We accepted the indoctrination beliefs of that culture, nation, or religion, and we lived our life unconsciously judging the world through those indoctrinated beliefs. And I'll link at the end my story of how I was indoctrinated by loving parents and how I recognized it and broke free. Now, the Bible tells us that Moses delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery, where Moses had lived as the Pharaoh's grandson and had been trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And he could have been Pharaoh and led Egypt, but instead he led the children of Israel out into the wilderness, where he gave them the law of Moses. And Moses set up a governmental religious system, a hierarchy of priests and judges who were to teach the law and administer it to the children of Israel. And every parent was commanded to teach their children to fear God, follow His commandments, and obey the priests. Now, when Jesus came, this belief system was the reality of societal life. The priest held great power over the people, and to question or break the law of Moses or disobey a priest, it could get us put out of the temple, shunned, imprisoned, or stoned.
We haven't started yet.
And everything in life revolved around keeping the law of Moses, from what we could eat, drink, what we could think, what we could speak, how we trim our beard, how we wash our hands, pray, everything, how far we could walk on the Sabbath. And we were required by God to pay 10% of our income to the priests, who became incredibly wealthy by governing or ruling over this religious system. But Jesus didn't hang out with the scribes and Pharisees and the priests, although he could have been a big hit with them if he'd wanted to go along with them. But instead, he went to the wilderness. He hung out with the common people, the outcasts, thieves, and prostitutes, the ones that the priestly hierarchy was putting heavy burdens on. And Jesus got in the face of the priests, and he called them, for their greed and how they were stealing the houses of widows to fill their own treasury. And he called them liars, hypocrites, and a den of thieves. And he was teaching the people an entirely different way to live than the priests did. And as the priests saw more and more people following Jesus, they saw their power and their wealth being threatened. And they said, well, we can't let them go on like this, or we're going to lose this good thing we got going for us. And so they sent spies to try to follow him and catch him in his words and catch him blaspheming so they could stone him to death. Now, he went into the temple and flipped over their money tables. And the temple to the Jews is kind of like what the Vatican is to the Catholics. And the high priest back then is kind of in the same office that the Pope is today. But he went into the temple and he called them, you blind guides, a den of thieves and snakes. You're not entering the kingdom of heaven, and you're keeping people out who want to by loading heavy burdens on them, and you don't lift a finger to help them because you know that this control you have gives you your wealth. And you love your doctrines and your traditions, and you tithe mint leaves, and you strain your teeth so that you don't swallow a gnat and eat something unclean and defile yourself. But you don't realize that spiritually you're choking on a camel. And he said, woe to you, teachers of the law. You're like whitewashed tombs. You're white on the outside and gleaming, but inside you're full of death and wickedness. Clean the inside first, and then you'll be able to teach the people. He said, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you keep all the traditions of the law, but you neglect the only thing that really matters, that fulfills all of the law and the prophets, and that is to love God and our neighbor as ourselves. Now, Jesus never said one single word of praise for the teachers of the law or the Pharisees or the priests. In fact, he told them to their face, he said, you are of your father the devil, and you are doing the works of your father the devil. Now, ponder that and contrast that with what he taught to the multitudes who followed him when he said, you are children of the Most High, benevolent, loving God, and you're blessed. And beware of the teachings or the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees, because just like yeast in bread permeates the whole thing, well, their teaching will permeate your whole mind with this angry, jealous God. And if you want to know what God is like, well, just look at me, said Jesus, because if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, and you know exactly what he's like. Now, Jesus repeatedly broke or contradicted the law of Moses. He said, you've heard it said by the priests, quoting Moses, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you the exact opposite. No, do not repay evil with evil. He said, you've heard it said by Moses that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you the exact opposite. I say, love your enemy. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for the ones that don't like you. He contradicted Moses when Moses said an adulteress must be stoned to death. Well, Jesus stood up for the woman and he saved her life. And he never condemned her, but he chewed up and spit out the religious leaders that brought her to him. And he was always making their arguments about God seem foolish, and they would leave looking like a bunch of buffoons. And Jesus, on the Sabbath, he broke the Sabbath. He taught that, no, the Sabbath, it was made for our benefit. It's not a legalistic religious doctrine. And he told his disciples, he said, the Pharisees are watching, go pick some ears of corn, which sent them into fits. And he healed on the Sabbath a number of times. And he even told the man that he healed, he said, pick up your bed and walk, knowing it was breaking the Sabbath. and that it would send the pious religious people into fits of piety, and it did. So do you think it's possible that Jesus came more to set us free from indoctrination in religious belief systems and to start another religious belief system? Well, and that maybe he was crucified because he was exposing the darkness in a religious belief system? Well, seems like it could be to me, but you make up your own mind. But if you like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, share it with anyone that you think might resonate with this, and we'll see you on the next video, okay?